Welcome to Silent Crime Case, where we explore the darkest mysteries of real-life crime. Today we uncover the tragic and twisted story of Mary Anderson and the chilling murder that left Pinville forever changed. Pinville, North Carolina, a peaceful suburban community just outside Charlotte, known for its pristine homes and family-oriented atmosphere. It was the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other with a smile and families felt safe behind their white picket fences. But on the morning of March 21st, 2012 on Drake, that sense of security was shattered. The residents of Pinville awoke to the shocking news of a brutal murder that would forever change their quiet town. Mary Anderson, a well-loved local woman, was found dead in her home. Her body had been viciously stabbed, and a disturbing number was carved into her stomach. This gruesome discovery marked the beginning of a shocking investigation, one that would unravel dark secrets no one in the community had imagined. Mary was the kind of person everyone knew, a devoted wife, a loving mother, and an active community member. But how could someone so beloved meet such a violent end? And what could drive someone to commit such a heinous crime? As the police delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a web of obsession, betrayal, and hidden relationships that led to this horrifying tragedy. Mary Anderson, a 45-year-old stay-at-home mom, lived in Pinville with her husband David Anderson and their two teenage children, Sarah and James. The Andersons were considered a model family by the neighbors. David was a successful lawyer who worked long hours, while Mary stayed involved in the community, volunteering at the local school and singing in the church choir. Sarah, 17, was an excellent student and athlete, and James, 14, was known for his love of video games. From the outside, it seemed like Mary had it all: a beautiful family, a comfortable home, and a prominent place in the community. But behind the picture-perfect facade, Mary's life was far from ideal. Her marriage to David had grown distant over the years, as his long hours and frequent business trips left her feeling isolated and neglected. Though Mary remained an active presence in her community, those close to her began noticing changes. Friends remarked that she seemed more withdrawn in recent months, her usual warmth replaced with a quiet sadness. What they didn't know was that Mary had started an affair with someone far younger than her, 18-year-old John Collins, the son of a neighbor. John had just graduated from high school and was preparing to leave for college. He had always been the popular, athletic kid in the neighborhood, with good looks and a charm that made him likable. He frequently helped Mary around the house when David was away, and their relationship quickly escalated from friendly neighborly chats to something far more intimate. For Mary, the affair provided the excitement she craved, a stark contrast to her strained and stagnant marriage. But for John, it became much more than that. John's infatuation became a consuming obsession, one that blurred the line between love and control. His thoughts were dominated by Mary, and with each passing day he became more possessive and desperate to keep her in his life. As Mary began to pull away, feeling guilty about the affair and wanting to fix her marriage, John's possessiveness only intensified. This growing obsession would eventually culminate in Mary's tragic death. March 21, 2012, began like any other day for the residents of Pinville, but for David Anderson, it would become a day of horror. Having returned from a business trip early that morning, David was excited to surprise his wife with breakfast. He had been away in New York for work, and as he walked through the front door, he expected to find Mary in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for their children before school. Instead, David was met with a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. As he entered the kitchen, David found his wife's lifeless body sprawled across the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. The room was in disarray, broken dishes littered the floor, and blood splatters stained the walls. Mary had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and the number 304 had been carved into her stomach. David immediately dropped to his knees beside Mary's body, his mind reeling in shock. His grief was raw and unbearable as he stared at the lifeless body of his wife, the woman he had loved for over 2 decades. He could hardly breathe as the weight of the moment crushed him. He could barely process what he was seeing. With trembling hands, he dialed 911, struggling to explain to the dispatcher the horrific scene before him. His voice shook as he repeated, "She's gone, she's gone," over and over, barely able to form words. When the first responders arrived, they found David still kneeling by Mary's side, unable to comprehend what had happened. Officer Rachel Miller, the first on the scene, quickly moved David away from the body and secured the area for the investigation to begin. It was immediately clear to everyone that this was no random attack. This was personal. Whoever had killed Mary had wanted to send a message. Detective Karen Williams, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience, was assigned to lead the investigation. Upon arriving at the Anderson home, Williams quickly recognized the gravity of the crime. The brutal nature of Mary's death, combined with the ominous 304 carved into her stomach, suggested a crime fueled by personal rage. This wasn't just a random home invasion. This was someone who had known Mary. The forensic team got to work, collecting blood samples, fingerprints, and DNA evidence from the kitchen and surrounding areas. One of the first things Williams noticed was the absence of any signs of forced entry, leading her to believe that Mary had let her killer into the house. This only strengthened the theory that the person responsible for the murder was someone Mary had known and trusted. David Anderson, still in shock, was questioned briefly by officers at the scene. Though his grief was obvious, standard procedure required investigators to treat the spouse as a person of interest in such cases. Williams knew they needed to rule him out before focusing on other suspects. At the police station, David explained that he had been in New York for a business meeting and had returned home early to surprise Mary. He provided flight records, hotel receipts, and statements from colleagues, all of which supported his alibi. Detectives verified his timeline, confirming that David had been on a flight at the time of the murder. With David cleared as a suspect, Detective Williams turned her attention to the next step, looking into Mary's personal relationships. As they began to interview friends and neighbors, one name kept coming up: John Collins, the 18-year-old neighbor who had been seen frequently visiting Mary's house while David was away. Neighbors reported that John had often helped Mary with household tasks and had even been seen leaving the Anderson home late at night. As more details emerged, it became clear that John and Mary had been involved in an affair. The affair, once a closely guarded secret, was now the key lead in the investigation. Williams knew they had to question John. When John was brought in for questioning, his demeanor was nervous and agitated. Initially, he denied any involvement with Mary beyond their friendship, but when pressed by Detective Williams, he eventually confessed to having a romantic relationship with her. He claimed that the relationship had been consensual and that he truly loved Mary. But there was more to the story. John revealed that Mary had recently tried to end the affair, which had left him feeling devastated. As the interrogation continued, John's emotions fluctuated between anger and sadness. He admitted that Mary had told him she wanted to end their relationship, wanting to work on her marriage with David. According to John, the news had shattered him. He felt betrayed, abandoned, and desperate to keep her in his life. Detective Williams noticed how agitated John became whenever the subject of Mary ending the affair came up. His hands fidgeted nervously, and his voice would rise when talking about how much he loved her. "She was everything to me," John said, his voice breaking. "She made me feel alive, like I was the only one who understood her." But there were gaps in John's story. He claimed that he hadn't been to the Anderson house on the night of the murder, insisting that he had spent the evening at home playing video games. However, when pressed for details about what games he played or who could verify his whereabouts, John faltered. His alibi was weak, and Detective Williams knew it. The forensic team continued to work tirelessly, searching for evidence that would either support or contradict John's story. They had already lifted several fingerprints from the crime scene, and some of those prints were a match to John's. This placed him at the Anderson home around the time of Mary's death, directly contradicting his earlier claims. John's nervous behavior and conflicting statements raised red flags for Detective Williams. She was convinced that there was more to the story, and she wasn't going to let him walk out of that interrogation room without answers. "Why were your fingerprints at the scene, John?" she asked pointedly, watching his reaction closely. John's face went pale and his hands trembled. I don't know," he stammered. "I must have been there earlier, but I didn't hurt her. I would never hurt her." But Williams wasn't convinced. The evidence was starting to pile up against John, and his emotional outbursts only reinforced her belief that he was hiding something. However, without concrete proof, she couldn't make an arrest just yet. As the forensic investigation continued, the team made a significant breakthrough. In addition to the fingerprints, they found strands of John's hair on Mary's body. DNA tests confirmed that the hair belonged to John, further placing him at the scene of the murder. The evidence was now overwhelmingly against him. The forensic team also discovered a series of text messages between Mary and John on her phone, which provided crucial insight into their relationship. The discovery of John's fingerprints and the incriminating messages were the puzzle pieces Detective Williams had been waiting for. They were irrefutable proof that tied him to the crime. The messages revealed that Mary had indeed tried to end the affair. In her last text to John sent the night before her death, she wrote, "This has to stop. I can't do this anymore. I love my family and I need to fix my marriage." John's response was alarming. He had replied, "If I can't have you, no one can." These chilling words painted a clear picture of John's escalating obsession and gave investigators a strong motive for the murder. Additionally, a neighbor had come forward with new information. The neighbor reported seeing John's car parked near the Anderson home late on the night of March 20th, the night before the murder. With this new eyewitness account, along with the physical evidence and the disturbing messages, Detective Williams knew they had enough to make an arrest. The investigation had uncovered the truth about Mary's secret affair and the intense emotional relationship she had with John Collins. But as detectives dug deeper, they discovered even more troubling details about John's behavior in the months leading up to the murder. Several of John's friends told police that he had become increasingly obsessed with Mary. He had confided in one friend that he couldn't stop thinking about her, and that he believed they were meant to be together. One of John's classmates even recalled a conversation in which John had mentioned he was planning to make sure Mary never left him. At the time, his friend thought John was joking, but in hindsight, it became clear that John's obsession had reached a dangerous level. The discovery of Mary's personal journal also added another layer to the investigation. In her private writings, Mary expressed deep regret over the affair. "I've made a huge mistake," she wrote. "I love David, and I don't know how I got here. I need to end things with John before it's too late." Mary's fear of how John might react to the breakup was evident in her final journal entry, which she wrote just days before her death. "John is becoming too intense," she wrote. "He doesn't want to let go, and I'm scared of what he might do if I try to walk away." This journal entry, along with the text messages, provided detectives with a clear understanding of the dynamics between Mary and John. They now had enough evidence to confront John with the truth. On March 25, 2012, detectives arrested John Collins at his home. His mother, Paula Collins, was devastated as she watched her son being led away in handcuffs. John didn't resist. He knew the evidence against him was overwhelming. At the police station, Detective Williams and her team prepared for a final interrogation. They presented John with the evidence, the fingerprints, the hair samples, the text messages, and the journal entries. John sat silently, his hands shaking, as he realized there was no escape. For a long time, John refused to speak. He stared down at the table, avoiding eye contact with the detectives. But after hours of silence and pressure, John finally broke down. He confessed to everything. John admitted that on the night of March 20th, he had gone to Mary's house to try to convince her to stay with him. When she told him that it was over, that she wanted to fix her marriage, John snapped. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and attacked her. After stabbing her multiple times, he carved the number 304 into her stomach, a number that, according to John, had no specific meaning, but was simply an impulsive act during his violent outburst. John's confession was chilling in its simplicity. He claimed that he hadn't meant to kill Mary, that it was a crime of passion driven by his inability to let her go. But Detective Williams knew better. The premeditation was clear, especially in light of the threatening text messages John had sent just hours before the murder. With John's confession, the case was closed. He was formally charged with first-degree murder. The trial of John Collins began on July 15, 2012. The courtroom was packed with members of the Pinville community, all eager to see justice served for Mary Anderson. The media coverage was extensive, with local news stations providing daily updates on the case. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sheila Mitchell, presented a strong case. They detailed John's obsessive relationship with Mary, the text messages he had sent, and his confession to the murder. The prosecution argued that John had acted out of jealousy and rage when Mary tried to end the affair. They emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime, pointing to the text message in which John had threatened Mary's life. The defense, however, argued that John had been suffering from severe emotional distress at the time of the murder. Blake argued that John's emotional distress clouded his judgment, making him incapable of premeditation. The defense emphasized that John had been under extreme emotional turmoil. However, the prosecution countered with a series of threatening texts that clearly showed intent and premeditation. Blake brought in psychologists to testify about John's fragile mental state, hoping to convince the jury to consider a lesser charge of manslaughter. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for only 2 days before returning with a guilty verdict. John Collins was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, John showed little emotion. His once bright future was now reduced to life behind bars, the result of a tragic and violent obsession. For Mary's family, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but the pain of losing her would never fully heal. David Anderson, along with Sarah and James, left the courtroom in tears, knowing that their lives had been forever changed by John's actions. Neighbors in Pinville could hardly believe that such horror had taken place in their quiet town. The news spread like wildfire, leaving behind a sense of unease and fear. The murder of Mary Anderson sent shockwaves through the Pinville community, shattering the town's sense of safety. Once a quiet, close-knit neighborhood, Pinville now felt the heavy weight of tragedy. Neighbors who had once smiled and waved at each other now spoke in hushed tones, trying to make sense of the crime that had unfolded in their midst. For David Anderson and his children, life would never be the same. The loss of Mary left a void that could never be filled. David, once a successful and ambitious lawyer, stepped away from his career to focus on rebuilding his family. He became a full-time parent to Sarah and James, doing his best to provide them with the love and support they needed after their mother's tragic death. Paula Collins, John's mother, was also devastated by the crime. She withdrew from the community, unable to face the neighbors who had once been her friends. The Collins family moved away from Pinville a few months after the trial, seeking a fresh start away from the reminders of what had happened. The memory of Mary Anderson's murder lingered in Pinville for years. The community held a memorial service in her honor, and her friends and family established a scholarship fund in her name for local students. But despite these efforts to move forward, the scars of the tragedy remained. Pinville, once a town defined by its warmth and safety, had been forever changed by the events of March 21, 2012. The murder of Mary Anderson left a void not only in her family's hearts but in the entire community, a painful reminder that dark secrets can lurk behind even the most perfect of facades. The story of Mary Anderson is a tragic reminder of how obsession and jealousy can lead to devastating consequences, unraveling lives and communities in their wake. What began as a secret affair ended in violence, leaving a family shattered and a community forever altered. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Franc-Tireur Silent Crime Case. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more true crime investigations. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. What do you think drove John Collins to commit such a horrific crime? Leave your comments below, and don't forget to check out our next episode as we explore another chilling true crime mystery. Stay safe, and until next time, keep questioning the stories beneath the surface.